DOJ employees that led to a report that led to his firing. And so when John Dowd comes in and when the president tweets, it takes away, I think, some of the credibility of the argument that McCabe was fired for good reason after an internal review. So the best course right now as a PR matter would be just to be quiet and let this unfold. Of course, that hasn't happened. I was interested in the reporting that people are annoyed with Dowd coming in on this. I thought that was a huge strategic error for Dowd to come out like that this morning, and it certainly complicated the president's weekend.
And the president's now bringing Comey into the picture. Josh, you worked at the FBI very closely with the fired former director, James Comey. He also is tweeting today saying, Mr. President, the American people will hear my story very soon, and they can judge for themselves who is honorable and who is not. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a very important story, and like many, I can't wait for it to be told. This is a story that has been long, we've been waiting for a long time to hear. And if you think about the discipline of someone like Jim Comey, and I would add to that Andy McCabe, look at the past year and a half. Look at the barbs and you know, the arrows that have been taken by some of the people highest levels of government that have been directed to them, yet we haven't heard from them, you know, going tit for tat. I think what we're going to see is a dichotomy in leadership. These aren't the kind of people that are going to go, you know, on social media and, you know, lob insults, but they're going to be thoughtful about what they do. And I think with the Comey book, it's coming out 1 month from today. I can't wait to read it. I think it's going to provide some insight into that picture as far as what did he see, what did he witness, and some of those stories throughout his career. I think he's going to treat these issues with the seriousness that they deserve and not just, you know, use the mediums of social media to, you know, use 280 characters to tell a story, but to do it thoughtfully and in a way that really shows the American people what went on at the FBI. You know, you'd mentioned what you know of these men, their integrity, their character, James Comey and Andrew McCabe. Were you surprised that Andrew McCabe fired back after he was let go? Not surprised at all, because now it's his opportunity. And again, if you think about it, I don't know if anybody really knows what Andy McCabe's voice sounds like outside the FBI. I mean, do you? I mean, we've seen the congressional hearings, besides what we heard during hearings, exactly. During hearings, right, and that's my point. I mean, he's not the kind of person that's going to go tit for tat, but think about the amount of insult that he has absorbed over the last year and a half with respect to him, unfair, extremely unfair attacks on his wife, and yet he's remained silent because that's what career people do. But now that he's out, I think the gloves are going to come off. He's going to be able to tell his story, and it also is an important story. Mark, one thing on that note that CNN has in our reporting is that Andrew McCabe's conversations with the president included multiple times in which McCabe was asked about his wife and donations from an ally of Clinton's. The fact that he was documenting, apparently, these conversations with the president and also what James Comey told McCabe about his interactions with Trump in memos, how key would those be as corroborating evidence? Apparently, Mueller has all these memos now.
Yes, and one of the reasons that you want those is from an evidentiary standpoint, you can get those in as past recollection recorded, which is normally it would be hearsay if you just did notes, but if you're doing them contemporaneously, then that's a way that you can get that stuff into evidence, number one. Number two is part of the reason that the White House, between Dowd and between Trump, are so feverishly commenting on this and stepping on this story is because they know that the special counsel is closing in on them. There's no other way. When you start to connect all the dots, this is a classic federal prosecution and investigation, and they've tightened the noose, if you will, around his inner circle, and it's only a matter of time. I mean, people keep complaining about kind of the glacial pace. This is on a fast track compared to normal federal prosecutions, and it is zeroed in right on the White House. So listen to Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley on Fox News just this past Thursday.
If he did fire Jeff Sessions, how would that go over in the Judiciary Committee?
I would only answer your question this way unless you push me on it. I don't think he should be fired.
I'll push you on it. What do you think would happen?
It would blow up the committee. The chairman has done a wonderful job getting nominees out of the committee with a lot of obstruction. But if you had to replace the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, with somebody new, it would blow the place up. It'd be seen as an effort to undermine the Mueller investigation. It'd lock the Senate down, and I think Jeff Sessions done a good job.
So, Scott, the president's tweet storm today, John Dowd's statement questioning Rosenstein and whether he should get rid of Mueller. Are you worried the president is gearing up to try to get rid of Mueller? And do you see more Republicans coming out and saying we need to protect the special counsel?
Well, I think the president has been unhappy with Jeff Sessions, but he has not gotten rid of him, and I don't think he will, precisely because it would put the United States Senate on lockdown. I have a hard time believing you could get another attorney general confirmed under these circumstances. And also, as you heard those two senators say, virtually every Republican over there in the Senate thinks Jeff Sessions has performed admirably and honorably and has done a good job of moving the president's agenda. So I think you'll continue to hear carping, probably about Sessions, maybe about Rosenstein. But it would be a crazy step to fire Jeff Sessions, given what it would do to essentially blow up official Washington and derail the rest of the Trump agenda for the rest of the year.
So just double checking that we're all on the same page there, though, Scott, in terms of getting to Mueller, you think he would go through Sessions ultimately to get rid of Mueller?
Well, I think he has to. I think the protocol here is that Mueller has to be fired by Rosenstein, who works for Sessions. So there's a progression of people here in the Department of Justice that they would have to go through. And I just, at this point, given how far down the road we are, given what we know about the investigation, the wisest course of action here is for the president and his team to do what they've been doing, and that's cooperate, turn over documents, submit to questioning, and try to get this done as soon as possible. Firing people, going down a road that makes it look like you're trying to end an investigation that clearly has turned up some things would absolutely derail this presidency.
Josh, people are really fired up about this McCabe firing on both sides of the aisle. The former CIA director, though, John Brennan, also put out a very strong response. He tweeted this in response to the president specifically, saying he would take his place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. Do you think Brennan weighing in this way is appropriate?
Well, he's obviously free to, express his opinion. He had a unique insight as someone who served in government for many, many years. So I think that that's one data point that we have as far as someone who's been in the room, who's made those decisions, and actually.
Of course, a lot of people are going to say he worked under the Obama administration.
Sure, they would. That's fair. But he's a career guy. If you look at his time throughout CIA in various postings that were non-political, I mean, he's someone who has served his country well and did so well before he, was a political appointee. I think that's an important data point. Let me just point out one quick thing, if I can, with respect to what Scott said, and I'm not disagreeing with what he said, but the problem I have is what are the consequences for people who politicize government, such as the FBI? So I understand that people on the Hill may not want to take any action, or it may upset them if Session goes. But what are the consequences? If you look at this situation with Andy McCabe, how much more political does it get? On a Friday evening, 26 hours before he retires, the decision is made that he's going to be fired. Now, this is either the worst profile in courage that we've ever seen, or there's something there about that investigation that we need to get to the bottom of. When did the Department of Justice know about these accusations for Andy McCabe, and what did they tell the FBI? Was this a rush job? Were they looking at the calendar for Andy McCabe and saying, we need to hurry up and get this done because we need to get rid of him before that clock runs out and he's allowed to collect a pension? The longer that took to get an answer, the more questions, really came up. And then the last thing I'll say is that we still don't know the factual basis on which that dismissal happened. And I think that is extremely problematic. It is a disservice to the American people. It's a disservice to Andy McCabe to point out, to lay out some conclusion without even providing the facts on which that conclusion is based.
But we do know, according to Jeff Sessions, that it was based on an Inspector General review, and it was firing that was recommended by the Office of Professional Responsibility, who is also staffed by career professionals, not Trump appointees.
No, you're right on it. And, the OPR and the FBI and the Inspection Division, these are career people. These are people who don't care about politics. My concern is, at what point did the DOJ go to the FBI and say, we need you to weigh in on this? Was it something they said, we need you to hurry up and get this done by a set date and time? If that's the case, I think that's highly inappropriate. I worked in the FBI for over a decade, and I never recall seeing a case that had a deadline attached to it, where you have to do this before X date. If that's what's happened here, I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered.
So, Mark, if you were on the president's legal team right now building a case to attack the credibility of the special counsel's case, as you were talking about the reason that they probably are reacting the way they do, what would you key in on? Would Andrew McCabe's dismissal play into your calculations?
Well, clearly what they're doing is they're trying to discredit the very origins of the investigation. If they do that, they're going to say you can't trust it. You've got to shut it down. It's it's kind of corrupt ab initio is the old expression, which means from the beginning or in its inception. And if it's tainted from the beginning, if McCabe is tainted, if Comey is tainted, then the whole investigation is tainted. The problem they've got, the problem with this is it's a fine line, because remember, what you're doing is it's a full frontal attack on the FBI and on, to some degree, related to the DOJ. I've talked to it just as recently as yesterday with assistant United States attorneys who are completely outraged by this. And those are people that ultimately, inside, are going to do this president more damage than he even understands. It's a very, very dangerous game they're playing, and they're playing in a way that I don't know that they're going to be able to survive, ultimately, at the end of the day.
Mark Arago, Scott Jennings, Josh Campbell, never a dull moment around here. Thank you, guys. Coming up, a Democratic member of the Armed Services Committee weighs in on the White House chaos and how it could affect dealings with Russia and North Korea, plus the Stormy saga and new court filings by the Trump team, seeking $20 million from the porn star trying to speak out about an alleged affair.
Knowing more than property.
Our breaking news, President Trump's personal lawyer calling for an end to Robert Mueller's Russia probe. Here's part of attorney John Dowd's statement, and I quote, "Speaking for myself, not the president, I pray that acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein will bring an end to alleged Russia collusion investigation manufactured by McCabe's boss, James Comey." Now, Dowd initially told the Daily Beast that he was speaking on behalf of President Trump. Then he quickly backpedaled, telling CNN he was speaking only on his own behalf, and sent out a revised statement. I want to talk more about this with Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna of California, Silicon Valley. So, Congressman, a lot I want to talk to you about. Let's start with just your reaction to President Trump's personal lawyer calling for the Mueller investigation to be shut down on the heels of the firing of former Deputy FBI Director Andy McCabe.
Well, it's outrageous, and you saw that he walked it back. I mean, it leads to the question, why was McCabe fired? And are they really setting this up to fire Mueller or to try to end the investigation? We all have had confidence in Mueller. We should let him do his job, find the facts, and have an independence of investigation. And the last 2 days have really been concerning in terms of the independence of that investigation.
So based on Dowd's statement and also the tweet from the president celebrating McCabe's firing, do you worry that the president is on the verge of trying to fire the special counsel?
I certainly wouldn't put it past them, and I think we need to ask some very basic questions. Was the president or Attorney General Sessions or anyone else involved in telling the Inspector General what to do with McCabe? You mentioned in your earlier segment that these were career people, but there's a question of, was there any political interference here? And if so, that goes to obstruction of justice. But McCabe's firing, and what McCabe said afterwards, where he said he believes he was singled out because of what he did after the Comey firing, raises huge questions of obstruction of justice. And I wouldn't put anything past this administration at this point.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you worried that people inside the Office of Professional Responsibility were pressured to recommend McCabe's firing?
Well, I think the question needs to be asked. The timing is very suspicious, 2 days before he qualified for pensions. And I think we need to know from the White House, from Attorney General Sessions, was anyone in the political sphere, did they have any communication with the career officials on this investigation? Did they have any influence on the timing of the investigation, on the recommendations? Did they ask for it to be expedited? Or was this purely a career decision? And then we need to know who made the decision that he should be fired. Was the FBI director consulted? Was this a political decision? Was this a recommendation from the career officers? But it seems the timing seems very fishy, and the facts seem very fishy.
We've also learned McCabe has memos of the conversations he has had with the president. They are now in the hands of Mueller. Are you confident the truth, whatever it is, will all come out eventually?
Well, I do think the truth eventually comes out in American politics, and and I'm looking forward to seeing what McCabe has to say. And I don't want to prejudge the matter. What I have said time and again is Mueller is one of the most trusted people in Washington. He used to be a Republican. He was trusted by Republican administrations. What is sad is seeing people for personal gain tarnish his reputation, tarnish the reputation of career officers who've served for 20 years. Let's have an investigation. Let the facts play out, and let's go where the facts are. I don't want to prejudge the investigation. I just want to preserve the independence of these agencies and the rule of law.
At this point, when you say that, preserving the independence of the agencies, that's so important. So many Americans are hearing that and saying, yes, that is what's important. But the bottom line is, with the president's tweets and with even Andrew McCabe's response, do you worry that there has been some serious damage to the credibility of some of America's institutions, particularly the Justice Department?
I do worry about it. I mean, when you grow up, the one thing you love about this country is that we don't have unlimited power. The executive branch has checks on it. I mean, every high school kid, every kid in elementary school, frankly, learns that. And for the first time in many, many years, certainly in my lifetime, you're seeing that question. You're seeing people acting out of their own political interest and running roughshod over agencies that were independent, over law enforcement, and that American tradition, American institutions being questioned. Frankly, it's the exact opposite of conservatism, where conservatives usually believed in the independence of institutions and in institutional democracy. So I do think damage has been done. The good news is I think America's institutions will survive this. We still have an independent judiciary. We have a Congress and senators, and I hope colleagues of mine on both sides of the aisle will stand up for American institutions and independence.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, the president's name officially linked now to a lawsuit to stop a porn star from speaking publicly about an alleged affair. Why he now claims Stormy Daniels owes $20 million. Stay right there. A new twist in the Stormy Daniels case. The president's legal team is now officially involved. In court documents, attorneys representing Michael Cohen and the president himself say the porn star could owe as much as $20 million for breaching a non-disclosure agreement that kept her from talking about an alleged affair with Donald Trump. And they've now filed papers to get this case out of California state court and instead before a federal judge. Daniels' attorney says it's just another example of bullying tactics by Team Trump.
This is truly remarkable. I don't know that there's ever been an instance in American history where you had a sitting president carrying out a personal vendetta and seeking in excess of $20 million against a private U.S. citizen who is merely trying to tell her version of the facts. He and his attorney, Mr. Cohen, and now others, are seeking to gag and silence my client and keep the information from the American people.
Joining us now, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Paige Pate. So what's your reaction, Paige, to these latest filings on behalf of the president?
Well, it does sound like another bullying tactic, and this is exactly the kind of thing that Donald Trump did when he was a private citizen. He had his lawyers act like bulldogs. They were always aggressive. But in this case, I think by being aggressive, they're actually playing in to Stormy Daniels and her legal team's hands. That's exactly what they want. If there was nothing to these allegations, if they were not true, the last thing you want to do is file a lawsuit in federal court. Take the case and remove it to federal court, where there's likely going to be hearings in front of a judge, perhaps even a jury trial where all of this gets aired out. I would think that's the last thing you want to do if you're trying to keep her quiet.
$20 million.
Yeah.
Would you be worried if you were Stormy's attorney?
Not at all. I understand the non-disclosure agreement does have a liquidated damages provision, and that usually means if one party breaches the deal, then they have to pay the $20 million. But in this case, that's crazy. No judge would enforce that type of non-disclosure agreement in a situation involving a private citizen, especially if these allegations have merit to them, if they can be corroborated. I think worst case, if she violates the non-disclosure agreement, assuming one is even binding, then she's looking at maybe paying back the hush money, which she's already offered to do.
Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, also says his client's story isn't the only one out there about Trump. Listen.
We have been approached by 6 separate women who claim to have similar stories to those or to that of my client. 2 of those women, at least 2, have NDAs. We are in the very early stages of vetting those stories.
Paige, what do you make of this legal strategy, mentioning these other women and their stories, even though he hasn't vetted their cases?
Well, it is dangerous because obviously you want to make sure if you're making an allegation, there's some merit to it, that it's a truthful allegation. But if it is true, then it would certainly put Trump's legal team on notice that, hey, you're not just going to have to deal with us. We may be able to show the judge a pattern of this type of activity. And if those other individuals also receive physical threats, then that's extortion. And I don't think a judge would ever enforce a non-disclosure agreement if it was coupled with that type of physical threat.
So you bring up the physical threats. You're right. Daniel's attorney says his client had been physically threatened to stay silent, but he didn't say who threatened her. Here's how the White House responded.
Obviously, we take the safety and security of any person seriously. Certainly would condemn anyone threatening any individual, but I have no knowledge of that situation and would refer you to the president's outside personal attorneys.
So how do you see this playing out?
Well, I don't know if we're going to see direct evidence that the president was making any physical threats, and perhaps he's done enough to cover his tracks so that some lawyer who may have said something, some investigator who may have said something, he's going to be able to effectively distance himself from that. But if it's a pattern of this type of activity, then I don't think any of these non-disclosure agreements, if others do exist, would be enforceable. Because if somebody's not voluntarily agreeing to a contract like that, then they can't be held liable if they violate it down the road. So any evidence of physical threats, whether it came directly from the president or his legal team or even someone further removed from that, I do think that will play into this lawsuit, and it will only help Stormy Daniels and her team.
One of the central questions has been whether this $130,000 hush money payment to Daniels violated campaign election laws. Do you think it's time for Robert Mueller to sit down with Stormy Daniels?
Well, I think that might be a little bit beyond the scope of his current mission. I think he would have to go to the Deputy Attorney General to get approval to look into that. But every new fact that we hear about this payment, where it came from, who else was involved, does suggest that it had something to do with the campaign, that it was intended to help Trump get elected, to try to keep Stormy Daniels quiet so this wouldn't be in the media right at the time of the election. If that payment was made for that purpose, then I think it is a violation of federal election law.
Paige Pate, thank you very much for your expertise. We really appreciate it. Now, a quick programming note. I'm going to go one-on-one with Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, at 8 p.m. tonight here on CNN. Don't miss it. Coming up, Facebook is suspending a data research firm with ties to the Trump campaign. And get this, it all stems from those personality quizzes we've all clicked on at one time or another. We'll explain next.
Lens is free.
Now to a story involving the Trump campaign and social media. It concerns those Facebook personality quizzes so many of us enjoy filling out. It appears the results don't just disappear when the test is over. Facebook says it is suspending a data firm now with ties to the campaign for using information from those quizzes without users' permission in order to target voters. That firm, Cambridge Analytica, denies violating Facebook's terms. CNN senior media correspondent Brian Stelter joins us now. So Brian, there are a lot of layers to this story. Help us make sense of it all.
Yes, and it all involves Cambridge Analytica, the company you just mentioned. It's this mysterious firm that promises to help political campaigns and other organizations target voters, really to micro-target them, to try to figure out exactly what you as a voter wants to hear at any given time and then deliver that ad to you. So Cambridge Analytica has been out there selling those services for years. And the Trump campaign, along with the Ted Cruz campaign, were two of the campaigns that bought Cambridge's services back in 2016. So go back a little bit further. Cambridge Analytica, in its infancy, partnered with a professor who happens to work at Cambridge University, no relation to the company, who created this personality quiz, who created this app on Facebook. Listen, I've done some of these. You've probably done some of these. Most of these are just fine. There's no evil purpose behind them. But in this case, this personality quiz, which about 250,000 people took, the data from it was then used by this professor and then handed off to Cambridge Analytica and then used to create profiles of voters. Now, what's remarkable about this is you start with those 270,000 people. Then you connect to all their friends. And before you know it, you have 50 million Facebook users' information. That's what was really remarkable about using this personality quiz to then go and grab so many people's data. Now, Cambridge Analytica says we didn't use the Facebook data to help the Trump campaign, but a whistleblower named Christopher Wiley begs to differ. He's given an interview to The Guardian in the UK and to the New York Times in the US, and he says he has a lot of regrets about how he worked with Cambridge Analytica on this kind of data project. This is actually what he said to The Guardian. He said, "This is insane. The company that created psychological profiles of 230 million Americans, now they want to get contracts and work with the Pentagon." It's like Nixon on steroids. And that's really why this matters now, Anna, right? Is, you know, the election is long over, the 2016 election. But Cambridge Analytica and other companies like it are still working on harvesting vast amounts of data about voters, about individuals, and then trying to use that data to target ads and target information to us. In fact, Cambridge Analytica has a contract with the State Department, and they've sought other government contracts as well. So this is an issue. It's in this case an investigation in the Times tomorrow about this particular use of Facebook data in ways that the company now says were improper.
Well, of course,
but there's a broader issue here.
Facebook has been criticized very heavily for not doing more to stop people on Facebook from being manipulated during the election, to say the least, obviously, with what we've learned of Russia's involvement on social media as well.
Yeah.
Did it surprise you, or what do you make of the fact that they came out and said, look, we are punishing Cambridge Analytica?
Yeah, this is yet another black eye for Facebook. I just put a column up about this on CNN.com. You know, it starts with fake news. You know, there was talk about how Facebook helps fake news spread during the campaign. Then it was the Russian propaganda you mentioned. Now it's this story about the improper use of data. Again and again and again, Facebook's being called to account for how its systems are being used and really being abused, whether it's an election in 2016 or elections in Europe last year, and now the midterms coming up here in the U.S. You know, Facebook says it's getting better. They say they know they're vowing to make changes, and suspending Cambridge Analytica is one of those changes. But, you know, I was with a Facebook executive last week. We talked about the midterms, and she said, look, we know we have our work cut out for us. Every day, people come up with new ways to spread misinformation. Every day, people come up with new ways to manipulate these systems. It's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole at the carnival, but with worldwide consequences.
How do you keep up, though, with these technological advancements? It's beyond me. Thank you very much, Brian Stelter, for breaking it down for us.
Thanks.
Good to see you as always. And don't forget to catch Brian tomorrow morning on Reliable Sources. It's at 11 Eastern right here on CNN. Coming up, United Airlines under fire again after one dog dies in an overhead bin. Another ends up in Japan by mistake. But now there's a third pet mix-up to tell you about. Stay right there.
10.
United Airlines is in damage control mode after a third dog mishap in 1 week. In the latest incident, the airline had to divert a plane after discovering a dog on board that wasn't supposed to be there. But earlier this week, you'll recall on Monday, a French bulldog died on a United flight after it was put in an overhead bin. Then on Tuesday, a German Shepherd bound for Kansas ended up in Japan. In the German Shepherd's place in Kansas, a Great Dane that was supposed to be on that Japan flight. Let's bring in CNN's Jean Cassar is joining us now. So, Jean, tell us what happened in this most recent United incident.
Which would be yesterday. It was United Airlines. It was a flight that was bound from Newark to St. Louis. And then they realized mid-flight that they had a dog on the flight that actually was supposed to be going to Akron, Ohio. Believe it or not, they diverted that flight to Akron, Ohio, with 33 other passengers on board. I guess dropped off the dog, and they do say they compensated the passengers. But that was just the third of many. Let's look at the second one. The second one was this week, a flight from Oregon to Kansas, and a 10-year-old German Shepherd named Ergo was supposed to be going to Kansas. Ergo probably never even realized he was on his way to Japan. And so he gets to Japan, and the owners are expecting to pick up Ergo. He's not there. They had to trace and find him. They brought Ergo back within hours. So you're talking round trip to Japan on a private carrier. And so now the family has him. But one dog died, and that was on Monday. That dog on a United flight was a small dog, so it was in the cabin in that authorized airline carrier, right? We all know about it, has the air holes and everything. And the flight attendant said to put it up in the overhead. And they said it was a dog. And United believes that the flight attendant may have not heard that, but the dog went up there for a 3.5-hour flight, and the dog was deceased. when they went to go get that carrier. Just in the overhead.
Just awful. I mean, for everybody involved in these situations.
Horrible.
But
And
to have
the
3 in
animals.
1 week,
I know.
Jean, I mean, is that just a fluke, or do you know more about like the bigger picture in terms of these types
Well,
of
it's
incidents?
interesting you ask that because the Department of Transportation in February had just come out with their latest statistics, which would be for last year. And they say that 24 animals actually died in care of U.S. Airlines. 18 of those, which would be 3/4 of those, were with United. 15 reports of animals injured on flights, 13 of those were on United. United does respond by saying that these dogs were compromised to begin with. Either they had their own health concerns or the cages, the boxes that they were in were not equipped and not proper for them. But it's not a good statistic to be going with at this point for United.
Yikes. Thank you very much, Jean, for that information. Coming up, we have breaking news in the Russia probe. CNN learning that special counsel Robert Mueller now has memos written by fired former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, documenting conversations he had with the president. What it could mean for President Trump next.